Hello, my name is Helen Oakley, and I'm co-founder of Leading Cyber Ladies, a global network for women in cybersecurity. And today, I have an exciting panel here to talk about proactive incident response. But first, let's introduce the panel. We'll start with Ryan. Ryan, please introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you very much. My name is Ryan Duquette, and I am a partner at RSM Canada in charge of our security and privacy risk consulting practice. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Ryan. Azim?
Thank you. My name is Azim Boblai. I'm the virtual CISO and the manager for Toronto Community Housing.
Thank you, Azim. Alan?
Hi there, Alan McDermott. I'm the head of IT, data, and security at Valeyo.
Thank you. And Anthony?
Hello, Anthony Johnson, former CISO of JP Morgan Chase, the corporate investment bank, Fannie Mae, and I currently run an organization called Delve Risk, where we do market research. So I'm a founder and managing partner at the company.
Thank you very much. So we have a very interesting topic, and I have put some questions for myself to ask. I really looking to hear your opinion and experience on these aspects, and I'd like to start with Alan. So a proactive incident response plan is highly dependent on the types that established within the organization, right? So transparency and trust actually are the key here, and we definitely need to find some ideas to ensure how the response team or team on call has this transparency overview of the enterprise system. So how can we ensure that they have all they need to address the response quickly? So Alan, maybe with you.
Sure, absolutely, thank you. So the first thing, really goes across most things with security, most things of any company, is the tone needs to be set at the top. So if the senior execs of the board don't visibly support it, you won't have the support needed, and then you'll be fighting the little battles rather than the big battles. Business needs to have skin in the game. So this can be through the BCP plan, understanding what the actual impacts are and how it aligns to what they are responsible for, who owns the process if it's down. If IT or the technical team or the security team is left to do this all on their own without that support, it's going to be an uphill battle. One of the key things that I've found in my time that really supports this and gets the message going is neutral third parties. This can be auditors, assessors, even cyber insurers if the company is going that way. They'll a lot of times require that certain things are set up that'll assign ownership through maturity assessments, et cetera. So that really helps with getting people in line to say, hey, this is something that needs to be looked at, and that this is a priority, and that it opens the channel for discussion with the little things. So it really sets the tone for the ability to be successful, and that's really the key, is just to set up the environment for success.
Thank you. And I would like to go next to Azim. From your opinion, how can we ensure that teams have enough transparency?
As we know, the times have been changing a lot, and the things are, in terms of cyber incidents, is also changing a lot. In terms of transparency, first of all, we should know what we know before we get into transparency. That has to be a basic idea of understanding what exactly we are trying to monitor, what exactly we are trying to take care of it. And that assessment has to be carried out in the organizations. Once we have that assessment, we know the exact criteria which we need to focus on. And this builds up the whole complete transparency of what exactly we have a gap, what exactly we are trying to focus on, and how we are going to move on. Based on that, once we implement our cybersecurity framework, we try to understand how we can address these gaps, how we can get this address in terms of every corner to take care of the responsibilities. And then we define the complete responsibility roles and requirements across the board. And that becomes a clear transparency to everyone what action has to be taken in terms of such incidents which are going to happen in future. So very clear, it has to come from a ground level. And as we move up at the top, it defines every step which we need to take it forward.
And thank you for that. And I really appreciate both of your comments. I've heard BCP, Business Continuity Plan as well, mentioned by Alan, and the steps bottom up, right, to go. Anthony, you've been CISO on many companies in the past. What would be your opinion? Anything to add here?
I do think it's important to have that level of transparency, and it's great to kind of say that it's a bottoms-up approach. However, I think that without the right level of support all the way at the top, When it hits the fan, you're going to find that you run into these really crazy situations. Like, for example, when I was at JP Morgan, we actually had to have real conversations about which CIO, because there was a CIO for this $40 billion line of business and this $30 billion line of business, which CIO was in charge. And some of them would say, no, you cannot take that app down. And another one would say, no, you absolutely have to take that app down. And so ahead of time, we had to game plan this. While support from the bottom up is absolutely critical, that top-down understanding of roles and responsibilities was paramount. And we actually shot ourselves in the foot a couple times during our tabletops when we said, okay, this CIO says we can't do it. This one says we can. Which one's doing my performance review, right? Like, it kind of gets into this crazy situation. So you have to have those conversations ahead of time. Top up, bottom down, has to be a sandwich approach.
I totally agree. You mentioned responsibilities, Anthony. I would like to keep you holding that thought because you're going to come back in a little bit. I would like to go to Ryan right now. Ryan, in one of our discussions before, you mentioned RSM has cybersecurity rapid assessment methodology. Now, we know that in order to get a strong proactive incident response plan, you need to assess where the company organization is currently at. So how this methodology can actually help?
Great. Yeah, thank you for the question. Basically, what our rapid assessment methodology does is it allows an understanding of business critical information and how that information can be targeted by attackers. Understanding existing policies and procedures, and most importantly, if an IRP or we talked about BRPs or whatnot, if they actually exist, how teams collaborate. We just talked about that. Virtual or various CTOs or whatnot. What previous incidents have happened, and how do they handle it, and what were the lessons learned from that? And this process also gives organizations the ability to quickly assess current gaps in the existing processes, security awareness training, lack of formal IR team, whatnot. And it gives a very strong idea of the current strengths and weaknesses in terms of personnel, processes, whatnot.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And you mentioned that process is almost like could be in addition to tabletop exercise, because similar outcomes would come with the tabletop exercise, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, next question I have, and I would like to start with Anthony now. So you had tremendous also experience being CISO, and data fatigue, like alert fatigue, is the real thing. Now the question is, how much of data metrics is too much, right? And how do you suggest to consider putting together the data from external and internal resources?
Yeah, so this is a really fun question because it's almost like asking a professional bodybuilder or athlete how many calories is too much or how many is enough. And the answer is it completely depends, right? If you work out like a maniac and you have a very advanced program with a lot of built-in automation, analytics, and you're highly mature, then you can consume vast sums of data, right? However, if you have a much smaller team, and so if you have a team of 3, 4, 5 people, you perhaps the organization hasn't invested in the automated capabilities in the ingestion, or even your data models maybe are a little bit more archaic. You have to go to where you have to kind of go to the point of where you can say, I can't eat anymore, where we're not doing anything else. We're not getting any benefit from more data. So it's a your mileage may vary conversation, I think, in a really, really big way. Having one big answer for this kind of sets people up for a tough conversation. I think there's a de minimis of like, hey, your program should be able to eat this many calories. And if you can't, you're probably anemic or whatever the heck that analogy may be. My wife's a dietitian, she'll correct me later. But there's it really depends on the maturity of the program, the state of your infrastructure, and how you've kind of thought, the team has thought about data in the past.
So would it be maybe correct say you have to start small steps based on where you are, depending on maturity of the organization?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's important. I mean, I know. I think one of the other panelists represents a professional service organization. I think it's getting those types of organizations to come in and help you build that assessment, right? To come in and say, hey, help us get a level of where we're at. because everybody internally will always say that you're better, like, oh no, we can totally do that. And then everyone externally, you just kind of have to gauge them of like, find that right partner that's going to help you. So you have to start small, have a third party that's going to come help you have more transparent, real conversation, and then grow from there.
And thank you for bringing that. Exactly, I wanted to ask Alan, because you work for financial services company, right? So what is your opinion on this topic?
Sure. So I've actually been with a number of financial companies, and really the key thing in my mind is each metric has to tell a story, and it has to be actionable. If it's not telling you to do something or something's wrong, it's not of use. If you can't action it, then it's of limited value. And also the value that you get from that versus the effort to get that metric has to be in balance, right? That's like security in general, right? If you spend $100 to protect $1 of data, whatever, it's the same issue. So as long as you've got that balance, and also when you're telling that story, who's your audience? So who's going to look at this? How is it going to help you in your story? So if it's going to the second line of defense, your operational risk teams, if it's going to business or technical teams, it might be a slightly different story. So you want to definitely tailor it to the consumer. And that really, then depending on if you've got all sorts of data everywhere, you want to pick and choose and be thoughtful with it.
I like that very much, Alan. Make sure you know your audience, right? Who KPIs are for, who's gonna read them, who wants to understand them. I think that's a very good point. The next question, we'll stay with Alan for now. Alan, so a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, actually earlier this year, I'm thinking about last year because I've been in the same setup for 2.0. But anyway, for Cyber Exchange 3.0, actually earlier this year in the summer, many security experts talked about the problem of data without context. Yeah. So how can SOC teams, for example, better present their data to support response and decision making? Any suggestions on how improving this context around data?
So yeah, again, yes. So again, if you're going back to, I assume the end goal here is we need more money, we need more help, we need more resources, and in order to protect the company better. So again, who are you going to with that message? So there's a lot of information that comes to a SOC. False positives are big. You get any sort of like security incident event management system, you're going to need like full-time people to manage that. So if you are able to align what they're looking at, those alerts, to the business line. So here's your business, here's the risks that are happening to that, here's the potential costs to that. Now, you don't want to get into the world of fear, uncertainty, doubt, because a lot of that's been overdone and people will just tune out. So you need to really put it into business terms and be able to say, here's what we can help you with, here's how we can, and we understand the costs of this, and here's how it balances. So looking at those metrics and putting it into, again, a story. So you can't just come up with a whole bunch of, here's a dashboard with a bunch of red on it. That's going to just either turn people off or tune them out. There needs to be, again, context with that, and you can have that data to support the overall story. But going with just the data, that's going to set you up for a larger challenge.
Thank you, Alan. And Azim, what do you think?
No, I completely second on Alan on this part, but the way more focus is always looking into three arms of this. One is the alignment. The second one is how you're going to invest more. And the last and the least is you're looking into how you're going to measure that. If you focus on these three main arms, you will be rightly taking in the right direction. Like for alignment with corporates, organizations, business risk, which has been there, understanding your business, understanding your roles and responsibilities, how you're working with your partners, understanding your partners, that's very important. And then we try to invest in people, resources, technology, infrastructure we are trying to bring to address this requirement. And last and the least is how we're going to measure all those things. What do you need to measure? You don't have to measure everything, but you need to focus on what exactly is required to move forward. So I believe once you have all the steps clear in your mind and you try to work on the steps, definitely there's a proper way of looking into how you monitor all this incident response for software.
Thank you, Azim. And since I have you here, Azim, I have a follow-up question for you. The severity of situation can also activate certain departments and actions in a response plan. How do you recommend teams proceed with establishing severity criteria?
Yeah, this is a very, very important question in terms of understanding as we are moving into cyber incident management. What was happening till now is we've been doing proper IT incident management. and cyber incident came across, and people were not easy to combine together, and they were confused how we are going to do the severity of understanding of which is P1, which is P2, priority 1 and priority 2. So first of all, the major idea of severity is to prioritize your incidents in cyber specifically. Not necessarily the IT incidents will correlate with your cyber incidents. Your cyber incidents priority will be different compared to IT incidents. So you need to first prioritize your incidents, provide them the severity, which has been critical, high, medium, and how you're going to address this based on the business. Again, where you're working across the vertical, not necessarily the financial requirement will be different from the public sector. Things are changing as we move forward, but as you compare to the verticals also, the severities are different based on the business requirements. So once you define all the severity, once you prioritize your things and you know what is your recovery time, that makes the whole idea how we're going to address all these incidents as we move forward.
Anthony, I would like to hear your opinion on this as well.
So I think this is actually one of the pitfalls that cybersecurity leaders have struggled with over the years. And what I mean by that is rewind 20 some years ago, we did a lot as security leader professionals to stand out, to say, hey, we're different from IT. And we created a lot of risk categorizations and modeling. And long way of saying, I actually think we need to align to IT more. We need to align to the actual business imperatives more, simply because the more we as cyber leaders say, hey, this is a totally different special thing, different type of risk. It's a new, it puts the business in this context of saying, I can't understand you deeply. And because they're largely trying to understand how to drive business relevancy, which usually comes from a top-down perspective. So I think that cybersecurity leaders need to understand the operational risk cadence of the enterprise deeper, the financial impacts deeper, and what that means, as opposed to coming up with a one-off.
Thank you. I think it's a very important point that you mentioned right now, that it has to, the risk has to be also propagated top down, right? To make sure that everyone in a team and organization understands what it means actually for organization. Because if we have incident response team who is daily looking at the issues, they may not have the bigger picture, right, of organization. That's a very good point. Thank you, Anthony. I would like to move to Ryan. Ryan, so I have a question for you now. Do you have any perspective to share an incident response drills to train and prepare teams? Beyond tabletop exercises, can you share some practices that our CISO community can implement? And I'm pretty sure you work with many CISOs.
Absolutely. Yes, we do every day. So there's lots that organizations can be doing, beyond just basic tabletops. One thing is a more technical driven version of a tabletop, an IR live testing purple team experiment or assessment of whatnot, where our RSM red team works with blue teams to help the client guide the response and document the responses and how they do. And it allows the client to view, real world attacks in real world time, which obviously helps rather than, looking at prior engagements or whatnot. From a CISO community perspective, I think there's a lot more that can be done, from building or joining threat information sharing initiatives, oftentimes based on industry. Right, industry verticals, and I think CISOs can be sharing a lot more, or collaborating a lot more with their counterparts, and then implementing lessons learned, right, from past incidents, and how you can leverage that knowledge into your various practices, like I mentioned earlier, user awareness training, protection, IR, etc.
Do you think, Ryan, that our CISO community can share some common practices? Should we actually enable sharing common practices for incident response? Because yes, we can learn our own mistakes, our own lessons, but there are so many other lessons that we could learn from. Do you have any advice here or ideas?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are hesitant to talk about their weaknesses in their organizations publicly. That's what I've heard from a lot of the CISOs I've worked with in the past. So I think there are a lot more conversations that can be having. We talked about transparency at the beginning, and just being having those tight knit communities and sharing a lot more information with each other.
how about the rest of the organization? Shall the rest of the organization be aware of the lessons learned from previous incidents?
Absolutely, yes. I think the more people at the organization that are aware of these previous incidents and lessons learned from them all, the better you can respond better, and if there's anything in the future.
Thank you, Ryan. Alan, I would like to go to you right now. As a head of organization financial services, what is your stance here?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
So, Shell, what would be our best practices? What should we share with our CISO community for the incident response plan?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think a lot of the things that a good plan, it's very, a template is important. I mean, and I don't say that every organization is the same, but good practices are good practices. So the ability to share lessons learned, to be open. I know a lot of organizations now are moving towards information sharing in a larger way. Things started a while ago with FSISEC and those various communities, but it can go beyond that. And lessons learned in communities like this or conferences go a long way, as well as open, again, lessons learned, templates, et cetera, and how to prepare, I think go a long way. There's a lot of organizations out there that have a lot of the pieces, but putting them together, getting that other insight from how lessons learned from others can really help move things forward and help the greater security community as a whole.
Thank you. And I think it's very important that you mentioned the best practices share with the rest of community. We here right now at this CISO forum actually sharing a lot, right? Even this panel, there's a lot that I found out from you. Thank you. Next question I have for, actually I would like to go back to Anthony. Anthony, so from the incident response plan, needs to be owned by someone. Okay, here you go. I knew I had this responsibility question for you, and I specifically wanted you to hold that. How do you recommend the ownership should be established? So what are the roles, their responsibilities around the incident response plan?
Yeah, I think that there's not actually one clean answer. I think that the only clean answer I would kind of give is that it has to be done ahead of time, right? And not in the incident, because it's not necessarily about who's the most passionate in the moment or who happens to be awake at 3 a.m. when this thing goes off. But tying it back to one of the previous questions, having that enterprise risk management or operational risk management as a tabletop conversation, and really putting that down with the leadership team and saying, all right, hypothetically, who's allowed to turn off all the systems? All right, it's not you, CISO, you can't make the decision. Okay, great. Who is? Let's find out who within the organization truly makes the decision. And in some cases, some companies, it's going to be a political conversation where it's going to be like the CEO has to be involved for that. Other companies, it's going to be, you know what, the CIO, we've empowered them to do that. But you almost have to get down to that level of granularity to really decide who can make those ownership conversations. Because when things hit the fan, you suddenly get law enforcement engaged. You have, you have active, hands-on keyboard, data exfiltrate, data moving. You're going to impact customers. And those are not going to be, that's not the right time to have egos and titles trying to make the decision here. And so it has to be done ahead of time. It has to be done in a methodical process. And once again, I really, really do recommend getting an external third party to help with that. And I'll caveat, my organization does not do any sort of professional services with enterprises, so I'm not plugging myself at all, right? But you need somebody trusted who can say, nah, so one of you needs to be able to wear, I've always called it, you wear the hat. Mm-hmm. Somebody has to put the hat on, and hats only fit one head.
Thank you. And I think it's a very important aspect of incident response plan and any other activities in security to have responsibility. And I would like to involve other speakers here. Please jump in and say what would be the best practices from your opinion to tackle this responsibility topic for incident response plan. Who wants to go?
I can jump in there. I think an important thing too is when it's an incident response plan for the company, especially when you're looking at it from a security perspective, it doesn't need to be a whole new different response plan. If you've already got an incident response plan that is well known within the company, it's tested regularly, you can add on to that or make it more specific to the security program. In a lot of cases, that to Anthony's comment earlier, who can shut down the systems? Well, it doesn't always have to be a security incident that does that, and that may already be established fairly clearly in some ways for other types of incidents. So that may go a long way towards getting that solution. I think that it's, but I think the key thing, as mentioned before, is there has to be just one owner at the end of the day. You definitely need a command and control environment during an incident. It's not a time for political battles or being overly nice, to be frank. You need to have that well established ahead of time.
Thank you. Azim?
And sorry, yes, definitely. I like to say this also is basically, it's also, as we've been saying from the start, proper roles and responsibility definition is very important in this. And again, there's a very thin line between a security team and the other functionality team, where you need to keep your segregations very tightly defined, because you are the one who's touching the keyboards of all the systems. You are the one who's trying to provide the right directions in what case you need to act on what time. So definitely CISO or the security team never comes in the picture of shutting down the devices. They only define the right terms and metrics where they need to take actions and who will take the actions when the proper roles and responsibilities are defined. And this is not a one-day exercise, it's a continuous exercise, how you look into this, because you cannot just get into actions on one day itself. It has to come on because you keep on changing. Organizations are improving, they are growing. So things will change, keep on changing. So your actions plans also has to update every now when you go across. And again, I said, because it all depends on vertical. I'm sorry to use this word. Cybersecurity, in terms, some organization it is looked as a luxury item. Some organization, it's a necessity. So it all depends also based on the action plan, how you take in that organization.
Thank you. And that brings something in my mind I'll ask a bit later. I would like to move on to Ryan. Ryan, I know you're sitting a little bit quiet there. So from RSM perspective, how do you divide short and long-term milestones for delivering the most robust and proactive incident response?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I might just touch on something very quick on that last one. The other thing, I greatly agree with Anthony and others were saying, one person should be wearing the hat, and we do see that a lot where egos are not in check a little bit. And I'd also add to that, perhaps, and again, we do consulting, so we are consulting on a lot of these incident response matters. Perhaps one person that can communicate that. We have had incidents where, lots of the C-suite will start communicating with us, and you can see in the communications that they're almost battling between themselves. So having that one person in charge of it, but also maybe one person communicating the organization's decisions to the third-party vendors is helpful as well. But from this question, I think, short term, it's typically just getting a plan in place, right? We deal with a lot of organizations that don't have any sort of plan, be it an IRP or business continuity plan. And this can be done in a matter of a few weeks. We've talked about templated versions or whatnot, a simple IRP to assign those responsibilities to people. And then, that can include, running through with various playbooks or, whatnot. Obviously, external communication trees for different vendors and whatnot. And that's really important, as well as baking in those communication channels. If things go down, you need to be able to communicate with people. We have had situations in the past where organizations will get hit and their email environment is down, and they've, the CEO will just task everybody, go out and fire up free emails wherever you can. And it was Gmail and Yahoo, and they were using fake names and then communicating with everybody, and it just slowed everything down. And we had to make a checklist as to who is communicating with who. So, short term, just get something in place. Obviously, long term, align that IRP with NIST or SANS or other different methodologies. Ensure the steps that you have in your IRP are actually tailored to your organization and are not templated and not just generic ones. Engage your legal, your HR, and PR in those steps. communication plans, whatnot. Again, more playbooks running through it, rehearse. And then we've talked a little bit about those metrics. So you can actually evaluate if your program is running properly. And again, I go back to rehearse. We've had lots of organizations that have this great, robust plan, and they've never walked through it. And then that's never the time during an incident to be dusting it off and walking through it.
And maybe something keeps coming up to my mind, right? The breach, when in the response plan, do you actually touch on a breach notification or the communication to customer? Like at what point do you define this in the plan, or do you have some separate policies and procedures that go through that? And maybe Azim, I see you want to say something. Would you like to step in here? Well, Ryan?
Sorry, Ryan.
No. Go ahead, Azim. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's perfectly said. You need to have a short-term and long-term plans because you cannot achieve in a one day, as we've seen from the start. Short-term plans, as Ryan said, yes, you need to address what is the low-hanging fruit. You can address that part of it and take care of that. As we do our assessments, we know what are the low-hanging and what are the long-term plans we need to carry forward. Based on that, we define our strategy. As rightly said, framework is very important. How do you work on the framework? Most of the organizations which I've seen in the past, they don't have a framework understanding also. Yes, now we have a very ready-to-go framework available. Why not invest in that? Let's start to implement. Not necessary that framework will sit for your organization, but at least you can pick and choose and you can start working on it, what is required for you. And then you can build on that as you move forward. But framework is very important as you move for the organization, which has been there.
Can I add one other piece though? It's really important for organizations and leaders to recognize that a cyber incident is not just cyber's incident, right? It has to engage the communications team, the public relations team, your customer service teams, right? If you're working at a company and you're like, hey, we're going to put together this tabletop, we want to get leadership, and the communications team and the customer relations team and all of those other senior leaders are like, yeah, I can't fit on my calendar. Guess what? It's going to be a nightmare when that event happens and all of a sudden communication says, oh, no, we get to decide our customer messaging, or when we do breach notification, we get to decide how we're going to do this. I've worked at a number of large organizations to the point of where we've had entire fake or staged websites for customers to come to so that we can flip on with a dedicated call center contract already established, so that when those things happen, customers have a clear line. They know how it's going to go. They know the order of calls or how they're going to work in that processing. So it really has to be incident response has to be a comprehensive conversation. And anything short of that, the cyber team is really being set up for failure.
And that's a very interesting point. Sorry, go ahead, Azim. Do you want to add something?
Sorry, just want to add, as Anthony said, it's again, you also need to know what to communicate. You cannot communicate everything and whom to communicate. In terms of, as he said very clearly, corporate your communication team, which has been the C-level. In C-level also, who should be involved? Not everyone is involved for the communication. And at last and the least is the service desk, which is taking quite a big action. So yeah, what to communicate, when to communicate, and whom to communicate, that's very important to understand as we move forward.
And I know Alan mentioned the business continuity plan, and both what Ryan said and Anthony and Azim brings back those thinking process of, those adverse effects when something goes down and you need to, like Anthony said, instantly get the call center on, right, to make sure that we have communication. So these things would be, Ryan, you mentioned short-term and long-term, right, different patterns. So that would be more for a longer term, right? Perhaps something, or would you recommend this to be also considered as part of the initial short-term plan that needs to be created?
Sorry, I was on mute there. I would recommend it for the short-term plan. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I have another question, and Ryan, I will stay with you here as well for the start at least. I like the discussion, how it's going. What are some of the risks that you have seen come up in managing an incident response plan? And is there anything particular that came up in the last 18, 19 months now in our new normal?
Yeah, absolutely, the new normal. One thing that we've seen happen quite a lot is, employees and business owners are not aware of the plan. We've seen that on numerous occasions where, IT or IT security have developed the plan, but senior leadership have not seen it, not signed off on it, whatnot. So we've seen this great disconnect, and at the beginning of COVID, when we saw everything switched to being focused more on operations, and some aspects of security, fell down the rank ever so slightly. Some of those plans that people had in place, weren't followed as much. A lot of the plans that we've seen currently as well don't assume, or they actually assume in office collaboration, and that's obviously not the case anymore. And with everybody working remotely, there's obviously impact to machines that are remote and whatnot. So that needs to be built into those incident response plans. We've talked about plan ownership, right? We're seeing organizations develop these in-depth and tailored plans to their environment, but they don't keep up. They don't keep them up. They sort of put them on the shelf and don't keep them going. We also see another gap. Somebody mentioned earlier about cyber insurance. We see that a lot of clients are putting together their incident response plan in order to check a box when it comes to cyber insurance, and that's typically not adding a lot of value, or it's not really the purpose of an incident response plan is to just check a box for insurance or whatever other regulatory body you are trying to appease. You have to really make sure that your IRP is well crafted and well developed for your organization, and not just to get your insurance claim.
One thing I might add to that too, I've seen is, so when you're getting that ready, if you're going to have an incident response company that'll help you in the case of an incident, make sure to get all that legal documentation done ahead of time. When there's that fan collision going on, you don't want lawyers duking it out for 4 or 5 days before anybody's able to log in. Definitely one of those things to get ahead on.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that one. Get the legalese done ahead of time. Yeah.
There was a question from the audience, Ryan. I think that was for you. How RSM is guiding clients understanding the cyber insurance, incorporating that into response? You mentioned that it's not supposed to be as a checkoff, but is there any further recommendations?
Well, I think cyber insurance, should be part of your IRP, right? Definitely we recommend that our clients get cyber insurance. It's vitally important in this day and age. We see a lot of clients that don't have it and suffer greatly through breaches. However, right, I don't think you should be, building your security practices just to check a box for cyber or for insurance or for other regulatory needs. So I think having your insurance provider in your IRP, they have a role and responsibility. They are built there, into it. If you have an incident, you are obviously going to call them, and they have, breach counsel, ready to go. They often have preferred vendors. That's the other thing as well. We talked about, doing all the legalese up front. Well, a lot of the insurance companies have vendors that they've already worked with in the past. They already have preferred rates with those vendors. Those vendors are on their panels, right? So it is a great team collaboration here. So definitely recommend cyber insurance and have them as part of that IRP plan.
Azim, did you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, just want to add in terms of cyber insurance, which is a very hot topic this year. It was when we came across when we were trying to do our cyber insurance. Earlier, it was just a checkbox. Cyber insurance, you just go across and move forward. Now, times have changed because due to pandemic and everything, cyber insurance company itself, cyber insurance has become a very critical factor for enterprise risk management. Why I say? Because you saw the situations have been changed. We were not focusing on this, and suddenly this happened. Same thing with cyber breaches, which are happening every day. We are trying to see across. But the best part, which I've seen in Canada itself, I don't know about the other part, the cyber insurance companies are now focusing more on security. That's a good part which I've seen, because they need organizations to come to a certain level of cyber controls. If they are not there, they are not ready to provide cyber insurance. So that's a big change compared to last year to this year. And that's really a good sign in terms of in every organization, people are trying to invest in cybersecurity.
Thank you. It's really positive to hear that it's changing and shifting into that direction. In the meantime, we have another question from audience. We have only a few minutes left, so maybe we'll wrap up just after that. But the question is, are there any particular frameworks that panelists recommend while planning an incident response framework? Who would like to take this away? Any particular frameworks that you could recommend when planning for incident response?
I can start with that on a very basic one, which basically we try to work with the NIST framework, which is already available, which we cover on the 5 pillars of NIST framework, which covers the recover and respond, which is a key factor in terms of protect, identify, and detect, which is already there. Beyond this, you also work with the ITL, and we also work with the corporate requirement, which has been there, which take care of your day-to-day incident management, problem management, and requirements, which has been there. Because things in ITL also has changed as we have moved from the libraries to libraries, and things have been taken care in terms of cyber requirements. So there are major, in terms of North America, we are trying to sue NIST, people go with ISO also, which has been there across. And nowadays, which is a common, which not I have seen more on the financial only, it's the Mitra attack, which is coming across, which is a major one covering n number of technologies and processes, which has been there in this part.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, to wrap up, I have one last thing for you, and maybe you can take each of you about 20 seconds to answer. I'm not going to time you, but what would be the key takeaway for our audience? I'd like to summarize maybe a key advice that you want our audience to really take away about proactive incident response plan. Let's start with Azim.
Okay, no problem. The topic itself is very good, proactive, because things are changing as we are moving across. In terms of incident definition is also changed now. Treating any conditions which is going to happen, and we try to address that conditions beforehand. It's called proactive in terms of addressing that part requirement. That brings us to our automations. That brings us to our requirements, because not every organization has a big cyber team sitting across to take care of it. So takeaway is more looking into, as we move forward, focus on automations, focus on try to understand how we can address the basic requirements in a short form, and we can take care of to the next level instead of we jumping across the gun and we're not addressing anything. So let's start focus approach. Let's try to define our requirements, and then we can take it easily in this part of it. That will also give the confidence to everyone who's supporting from outside, including your C-level, including your organization, which has been there this part.
Thank you. Who would like to step in next?
So I can go next. I think the big thing that I would say is if you're in an organization where you're having trouble getting things going, that you're getting trouble getting buy-in, look to auditors, look to third party, look to people who are seen as impartial. A lot of the time, if you and this other person say the exact same words, it's seen differently. So understand where the message is coming from and see if you can leverage that. That can get you a lot of mileage.
Thank you. Anthony?
I think that when you're dealing with incident response, one overarching piece of advice would be to identify where the red line is. Every organization has one. Figure out what that real pain point is, and ask those tough questions. Because the worst thing to happen is an event to push you to that red line, and then your organization hasn't prepped or tested or built a plan around that. So really look at, what are the hard questions? What would be the, oh my goodness, worst case scenario? How would we think about this because it's complicated? And then try to solve for that. And even if you do that as a thought exercise with a partner, you're going to back into, oh my gosh, we're not ready for that. Okay, great. Let's tackle something more meaningful, but you know where you're striving to. So I think ask the tough questions.
Tough questions. I love that. And Ryan, honored to close this statement for you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, I agree with what all the other gentlemen here said. But basically, I would start with just having an understanding of your business critical information and then putting a plan in place. We still see a lot of organizations that don't have any plan, let alone running through them. So just start by getting something. And we've talked about, if you're having those challenges, getting buy-in. Leaders these days, need to be aware of these. and have plans in place and run through them. Anthony just mentioned that as well, so I'll reiterate that one.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting discussion. I learned myself a lot. And thank you everyone for participating, for joining. Thank you for our panelists for joining this panel, and our audience who was there as well. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.